Let's read together from 1 Corinthians chapter 10, and we're reading from verse 23. All things are lawful for me, but all things are not expedient. All things are lawful for me, but all things edify not. Let no man seek his own, but every man another's wealth. Whatsoever is sold in the shambles, that eat, asking no question, for conscience sake, for the earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof. If any of them that believe not bid you to a feast, and you be disposed to go, whatsoever is set before you, eat, asking no question, for conscience sake. But if any man say unto you, this is offered in sacrifice unto idols, eat not for his sake that showed it, and for conscience sake, for the earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof. Conscience, I say, not thine own, but of the other, for why is my liberty judged of another man's conscience? If I by grace be a partaker, why am I evil spoken of for that which I give thanks? Whether therefore you eat or drink, or whatsoever you do, do all to the glory of God. Give none offence, neither to the Jews, nor to the Gentiles, nor to the church of God. Even as I please all men in all things, not seeking mine own profit, but the profit of many, that they may be saved. This final section, or possibly two little sections, really have the idea that there are things that we might do in life that sometimes we have to decide whether they are profitable as opposed to legal. And the last little subsection, which we did read there, we don't know whether we'll get to it in this particular recording, ends with this idea that whatever you do, do all to the glory of God. We can see in this section here that the apostle starts off by saying, all things are lawful for me. Now, that doesn't mean that anything that he wants to do, he can do. This is not an absolute statement. What he means in terms of things that you might have a choice about, things that you might have a moral conscience about, whether you eat certain foods, or whether you drink certain drinks, or whether you take food that has been processed in a certain way, or he's really saying all of those things actually are legitimate. They're lawful in that absolute sense, but they're not all expedient or profitable. So not everything about life that I can do is good for me. That's an important lesson, isn't it? Not everything that I can do in life actually will be good for me, will actually be beneficial for me. All things are not necessarily profitable, so we have to make a choice in life as to do the things that we think are going to be the most beneficial, glorifying to God. We'll get that at the end of the chapter. Beneficial for my progress as a Christian, beneficial for the people I work with, the believers I try to help. So he says all things are out there for the taking in these matters where there's no direction in Scripture, where there's no Scripture saying that's a sinful thing or a wrong thing. It reminds me of Hebrews chapter 12, lay aside every weight and the sin which doth so easily beset us. And there's a distinction there made in Hebrews chapter 12 between things that might hold you back. There's nothing necessarily wrong with them. They're weights, they distract, they hold you back, they hold you down, so you can't run your race for God effectively, so you can't do what you'd like to do for God effectively. Then there are sins, and he makes that, he distinguishes between those two things, the weights and the sins. So they might be legitimate, but they might not be wise. There might be things that personally I feel okay to do, but they would be culturally unwise in the society in which I'm currently living, or the country I'm visiting, or the people group I'm working with, things that might be sensitive to them. He's been dealing with these types of things in these chapters. So it's not that there is an absolute right that you have to do everything that you're free to do. You've got to be wise. Is it profitable? And does it build people up? Does it help them grow as believers? Now he says in verse 24, don't look out just for yourself. Let no man seek his own, but every man another's wealth. See what he's doing here? He's saying, don't just look out for yourself, but look for the blessing and benefit and help that you'll be to someone else. Let no man seek his own, but every man another's wealth. Now he's going to talk about things that are sold in the marketplace in the next few verses. The shambles, the meat market. Now he says, if you're buying something there, don't ask any questions, eat it. Asking no question for conscience sake. Paul is telling us here that the earth and the things in it, the food, the animals, the produce, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. So you can go and buy stuff in the marketplace. You don't need to question whether it is kosher, whether it is halal, you can eat that freely. That principle applies to us today. But it particularly applied to people then with the sensitivity towards certain processes by which their food would be brought to the market. But he does say in verse 27, if you are asked to go to a feast. So if an unbeliever asks you to go to a feast, any of them that believe not bid you to a feast, and you feel it's the right thing to do, so you have perfect liberty to go or not to go, so you're minded to go, you feel it's the right thing to go, well, whatever you eat, don't ask questions. Just eat it. Receive it. So if no one makes any comment and no one tells you what's been done to that food or how that food came to be processed, don't ask any questions, just eat it. Your conscience is clear. But if someone says to you, verse 28, this is offered in sacrifice to an idol, then don't eat it. Not because it's wrong to eat it, because the meat hasn't changed because it was offered to an idol, but for the conscience of the person who's told you. Eat not for his sake that showed it. And your conscience then becomes affected because you now know that that meat was offered to an idol. So you see the point. If you buy it in the market, don't ask a question. It might have been offered to idols. That's irrelevant. It's just meat. If you're asked to a feast and you feel you should go, eat what's given. If no one tells you, just eat it. But if someone tells you that meat has been offered to idols, then don't eat it, because by this stage you'll offend the conscience. Well, not offend the conscience, but affect the conscience of the person. The unbeliever knows that you don't worship their idols, so don't eat their meat. And your own conscience will be affected if you do go against that principle he's teaching here. So he says, remember, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. But remember, you've to take into account other people. So the conscience, he's saying in verse 29, is not your own, but the other person's conscience. Now your liberty is judged. Why is my liberty judged by another man's conscience if I by grace be a partaker? No, it's the fact that you could be evil spoken of for something you've given thanks for. In other words, you then are seen to be party to that demonic form of worship, that idolatrous form of worship. Now, in the next section, we're going to see that whatever you do, do it for the glory of God. But this is an important section, and this, you'll get Romans 14, you'll get passages early in 1 Corinthians that deal with circumstances change when other people's consciences are involved, and when it affects how other people perceive your love for the one true and living God. So we need to be wise, don't we? And this passage is really about liberty being restrained because we're being wise about how we live in those circumstances. Thanks for joining us again. May God bless his word to you.